Imagine this. You come home and see your 3 suitcases neatly placed on the front porch, along with a note that says, "Leave. We're no longer family." What would you do in that situation? That's precisely what happened to me 3 years ago, and I chose to walk away. I truly believe no one would ever stand up for me. But then, just 1 month later, on his 75th birthday, my grandfather gave my parents and my sister a lesson they'd never forget. So what did he do? Stay with me. I'll tell you exactly what happened. Hello, everyone. My name is Stephanie. I'm 28 years old and currently the head of sales at a well-known car dealership in Chicago. I've just gone through a significant turning point in my life, the passing of my grandfather, James. He passed away a little over a month ago, and I've just received his will. He left me $500,000, just like he promised 3 years ago, on the day he taught my parents and my sister a lesson they'll never forget. Now, sitting in front of his grave, the memories of what happened more than 3 years ago are flooding back like a tidal wave. The images, the sounds, and the emotions from those days all come back with vivid clarity. I can still see the anger on my father's face, the stunned look in my mother's eyes, and most of all, the firm expression on my grandfather's face when he spoke the words that would change our lives. The story I'm about to tell isn't just about money or inheritance. It's a story of betrayal, loyalty, and how a 75-year-old man taught his family a lesson in justice they'll never forget. My life story took a sharp turn 3 years ago in 2022. At the time, I was 25, had been working for 3 years at the car dealership where I still work, and lived with my parents to save on rent. Along with me, my sister Harper, who was 27 then, also lived in our parents' 2-story home in Lincoln Park. Every month, we paid our parents $1,000 in living expenses. They always emphasized that it was about fairness. Anyone living in the house needed to contribute, but I knew a secret. Every time we handed over the money, they secretly gave Harper her share back. She was their golden child. The first time I discovered this was by accident. I saw Dad handing Harper $1,000 in the garage. After that, I started paying more attention. On 2 other occasions, I caught them doing the same thing. Sometimes the jealousy burned quietly inside me. I couldn't take the favoritism anymore. One night during dinner without Harper, I finally found the courage to confront it. Just as Mom placed the roast on the table, I asked, "Why does Harper get her $1,000 back, but I don't?" Dad set his fork down and looked at me with cold eyes. He said firmly, "My house, my money. I'll give it to whoever I want." His answer left me completely speechless. Legally, he was right. He had every right to do that. Sensing the tension at the table, Mom jumped in with a softer tone. She said, "Harper's having some financial trouble, so we're just helping her a bit." But I knew she was lying. Favoritism started when we were kids and never stopped. Harper always got the better toys, had her college paid for, and now she was even getting her living expenses paid. After that uncomfortable dinner, I decided never to bring it up again. Truthfully, even though it felt unfair, I still felt financially lucky. Living with my family had allowed me to save quite a bit. If I had rented an apartment in Chicago, I would have been paying at least $2,000 monthly in rent and bills. So I stayed quiet and kept living there for another 3 years. Thanks to a steady income and low expenses, I saved over $100,000. With that savings and a recent promotion to sales team leader, I started planning to buy my condo when I turned 27. But all those bright future plans fell apart one afternoon in May 2022. That Monday, early May, I had just wrapped up a stressful shift, closing 3 car deals, and drove home around 6 p.m. As I pulled into the garage and stepped out of the car, what I saw stopped me cold. My 3 familiar black suitcases were neatly lined up on the front porch. A wave of dread washed over me as I hurried toward the house. My heart started racing when I spotted a white sheet of paper taped to the most enormous suitcase. On it were the words, "Leave. We are no longer family." A chill ran down my spine. I recognized that handwriting instantly. It was my father's. My eyes shifted to the front door, and I noticed something off. The old lock was gone, replaced by a shiny new silver one. To be sure, I pulled my keys from my pocket and tried them. Just as I suspected, the key didn't fit. Staring at that new lock, the truth hit me like a punch. They had planned this carefully, deliberately. The goal was simple: kick me out of the house I was born and raised in. And then a storm of questions exploded in my mind all at once. Why would they do this? What did I do wrong? I paid my share of the bills every month. I never caused any trouble, so how could they do something this cruel? It took nearly a full minute before I could calm myself. Then I decided to call them. I needed to know the truth. I tried Mom first, hoping she'd give me some explanation. The phone rang and rang. No answer. Next, I called Dad. After nearly 10 long rings, he finally picked up. His voice was cold. "Why are you calling me?" I didn't waste a second. I asked, "Did you and Mom kick me out of the house?" Without even pausing to think, he replied firmly, "Yes, from now on, you're no longer my daughter." His words cut like a knife. I could barely breathe. My voice trembled as I asked why. What did I do? He didn't soften his tone. He didn't sugarcoat a thing. He said, "You have money, but refuse to help your sister. That's why." And with that, he hung up. I immediately tried calling back, but my number was already blocked. Standing alone outside the house with nothing but my 3 suitcases, I felt the world collapse around me. For the first time in my life, I truly understood what it meant to be homeless, not just in the physical sense, but emotionally, too. The coldness in my dad's voice during that phone call reminded me of what had happened exactly 1 week earlier, the moment that triggered everything. That night after dinner, while we were all still sitting around the table, Harper suddenly turned to me with a bright smile and said, "I'm about to open a coffee shop downtown. Can you lend me $30,000? Without hesitation, I answered, "I don't have that kind of money." I said no because $30,000 is a considerable amount, nearly a quarter of all the savings I'd worked so hard to build. But the bigger reason was this. Over the past 3 years, Harper had borrowed money from me 3 times, totaling $2,000, and she hadn't paid back a single cent. First, it was $500 for urgent car repairs, then $800 for a marketing course, and finally, $700 because she was temporarily struggling. Every time, she promised to pay me back within 2 weeks. She never did. When I refused, my dad stopped eating, slammed his fork down, and looked me dead in the eye. "You have to lend Harper the money. Family helps each other." Despite his commanding tone, I stayed calm and replied, "But I really don't have that kind of money, Dad." I thought my firm answer would be enough to end the discussion. I was wrong. Mom immediately jumped in. She gave me a suspicious look and asked, "Your salary isn't low. You only pay $1,000 a month for expenses. Where's the rest of your money? By my calculations, you've saved at least $50,000 by now." That kind of prying into my personal finances made me uncomfortable. I've always hated when people dig into my private life and how I spend my money, even if it's family. After seconds of holding my thoughts in check, I responded logically, "You're right. I've saved some money, but Harper's salary isn't lower than mine, and she gets $1,000 back from you every month, so where's her money?" The moment I finished speaking, my dad's face turned red with rage. He growled, "You don't get to question us. Watch your mouth." I decided not to continue the argument because he'd completely lost control, not because I was afraid, but because I knew it was pointless to reason with people who couldn't stay calm in a conversation. Then Harper chimed in softly, as if trying to smooth things over. "If you won't lend it to me, at least loan it with interest. I'll pay you back at bank rates." As soon as Harper mentioned interest, Mom jumped on the idea. "You see, she'll pay you interest. It benefits you too." But I stood firm. No matter what logic they threw at me, no matter what promises were made. Finally, I got up from the table and decided that was the end of the conversation. Before I left the dining room, I turned to Harper and said clearly, "If you want me to lend you money with interest, then first pay back the $2,000 you owe me, with interest for the past 3 years." My words hit like a bomb. Dad exploded again, shouting, "How dare you talk to your sister like that?" By then, I had no energy left to respond. Tired of all the family drama, I quietly walked upstairs to my room. Right after I closed my bedroom door, I pulled out my phone to check my bank account. The amount? $126,300. Everything I had saved over 3 years of hard work was still there, clearly showing on the app. But I had a gut feeling something was off. They wouldn't just let things be once they realized how much money I had. After thinking it over, I decided to protect my savings by putting $120,000 into a 3-month online term deposit. When the bank app confirmed the deposit had been completed, I finally felt a bit of relief. At least that money would be safe for the next 3 months. But there was one thing I didn't see coming. After that dinner, the entire atmosphere in the house shifted. They started using a silent treatment strategy against me. No one in the house said a single word to me. At dinner, if I walked into the dining room, everyone would get up and leave. There were nights they had already sat down to eat, and the moment they saw me coming downstairs, they stood up and left, heading out to eat at a restaurant instead. This childish behavior was emotionally painful and honestly ridiculous. They were nearly 50 years old, yet they acted like sulking children throwing a tantrum. I thought their pettiness would stop at just ignoring me and avoiding interaction, but I had underestimated just how cruel they could be. They went much further than I ever imagined. They kicked me out of the house with a note that said, "We are no longer family." Sitting on the cold front steps with my 3 suitcases beside me, I felt a deep sense of bitterness toward the very people I had once loved and trusted the most in this world. About 20 minutes later, while I was still sitting helplessly on the porch, my mind spinning, my parents' silver Honda CR-V slowly rolled into the garage. Seeing that I hadn't left yet, my dad stepped out of the car with a face as cold as stone. He looked at me and shouted, "What are you still doing here? Want me to call the cops?" By that point, I no longer felt the need to hold back or try to preserve what little was left of our so-called family relationship. I stood up, looked him straight in the eye, and said firmly, "Go ahead, call them, but you should know you're illegally evicting me. Under Illinois law, I have every right to stay in this house for another 30 days. He let out a cold laugh and replied, "Suit yourself. But if you stay 30 more days, I promise you, there'll be 30 days you'll never forget." That thinly veiled threat made my blood boil. I shot back, "Is that a threat, Dad?" He shook his head blankly and said, "I'm not threatening anyone, but you'd be smart to leave right now. We're not family anymore." His cruel and final words made me look hard at the situation. He wasn't wrong. Legally, I could stay, but eventually I'd have to leave, and dragging things out would only lead to more pain and pointless drama. It was better to end it all right then and there. 2 minutes later, realizing no point in escalating things further, I walked to my car and opened the trunk. One by one, I loaded my suitcases inside. I looked at them one last time before getting in and driving away for good. I pulled the note my dad had written from my pocket, held it before them, and said, "I want you both to remember this note. From now on, we're completely done." They stood there in silence. Neither of them said a word. As I started the engine and pulled out of the garage, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The last image I saw was of my parents walking back into the house, cold and emotionless, without the slightest hint of regret or hesitation for abandoning their daughter. As the car rolled away from the familiar street I had grown up on, I made a promise to myself. Never forget this day. The day I learned the most painful truth about the people I once trusted more than anyone else in the world. After leaving their house, I didn't want to head straight to a hotel. Instead, I decided to stop by the Daily Grind, a cozy little coffee shop on the corner of Lincoln, the one I usually visited on weekend nights. As soon as I stepped into the warm space filled with the rich smell of coffee and soft amber lighting, a familiar voice called out, "Stephanie." I turned around to see who it was, and to my surprise, it was Victor, my cousin, sitting at a corner table with a cup of coffee in front of him. He waved at me enthusiastically. Victor, 26, had just returned to Chicago from London after working at a financial consulting firm for 2 years. He and I had always been close in that kind of steady, no need to call, everyday family bond. We didn't have to talk all the time, but whenever we met, we could go on for hours, like no time had passed. After the greetings, I sat down across from him, ordered a black coffee, and we started catching up. After talking a bit about his job in London and what brought him back to Chicago, Victor turned the conversation to me. It was evident from my face that something was wrong. After a few persistent questions, I opened up and told him everything, from Harper asking to borrow money, the fight at the dinner table, to the scene with the 3 suitcases and that brutal note on the porch. Victor listened to the entire 20 minutes without interrupting once. His eyes stayed locked on me, brows occasionally furrowed at some of the harsher details. When I finished telling him the whole story, he finally spoke, his voice tight with anger. "They're beyond cruel. Honestly, they're worse than animals." That made me laugh. We stayed and talked for another hour about everything from Victor's plans to the state of the real estate market in Chicago. As we were about to leave, Victor looked at me with genuine concern and said, "Stephanie, come stay at my place tonight. At least get a good night's sleep without having to waste money on a hotel." As much as I appreciated the offer, I gently shook my head and replied, "Thanks, Victor, but I think I need some time alone to think. I'll be okay." Knowing he couldn't change my mind, Victor said goodbye. We parted ways, promising to hit a bar soon and have a proper night out. That night, I checked into a hotel near downtown Chicago. Lying on the stiff bed under the hotel's thin blanket, I couldn't fall asleep. My mind was spinning with images from the past, memories of the blatant favoritism my parents had shown Harper over the years. I remembered how, when we were kids, Harper always got expensive birthday and Christmas gifts. I, on the other hand, got the cheaper ones. Whenever I asked why, my parents always had the same answer: girls need to be spoiled more. Except in our case, it meant Harper needed to be spoiled more. You're tougher, they'd say. You're stronger. The differences were even more apparent when we were in high school. Dad paid for Harper to attend art camps, take piano lessons, and attend pricey tutoring programs. Meanwhile, I got none of that. Anytime I brought up needing support, the answer was always, "You're stronger. You'll figure it out." When it came time for college, I had to take out student loans and work part-time to pay for tuition and living expenses. On the other hand, Harper had everything covered: her college tuition, monthly living costs, and even money for shopping and hanging out with friends. Remembering all of it filled me with a deep resentment toward them. Still, not everyone in the family treated me that way. Some people genuinely loved and cared for me. My grandfather, James, my Uncle Jordan, Dad's younger brother, and Aunt Naomi, Jordan's wife. They always stood up for me whenever my parents' favoritism got too obvious. They would urge my parents to treat both their daughters more fairly, but those efforts were always brushed aside. There was even one time when Uncle Jordan confronted my dad about how I had to take out loans for college while Harper got full financial support. Dad lost it. He almost hit Jordan and screamed that he was acting superior and interfering in his family's business. After that incident, no one confronted my parents directly anymore. Instead, they tried to make it up to me quietly. Grandpa James often gave me money when he visited, constantly reminding me to call him if I needed anything. Uncle Jordan would buy me gifts on special occasions, or take me out for dinner to talk and check in on how I was doing. Even though I had been mistreated in my home, I still felt lucky. At least some people truly loved me and saw my worth. Their care was like small, warm light beams in some of my darkest days. That night, lying in the cold, unfamiliar hotel room after everything that had just happened, I wanted to call Uncle Jordan or Grandpa James to talk, to find comfort. But after thinking it over, I decided not to. I didn't want to worry them or stir up more family drama. In the end, I chose to stay quiet and face the storm on my own. The next morning, I went to work like I always did. At the office, I tried to stay focused on selling cars, doing my best not to let personal issues affect my performance. During my 1-hour lunch break, I searched for apartments near the dealership on Zillow and Apartments.com. Later that afternoon, after my shift ended, I toured a few listings I had saved earlier. The first place was in Lincoln Park, $1,900 a month, but it was too small and dark. The second one in Logan Square was more spacious, but it was on the ground floor with windows facing directly into a dumpster. The last one I viewed in Wicker Park had a great location, but the rent was $1,600, well over the budget I had set. Days 2 and 3 went pretty much the same. I toured a few more places, but none felt quite right. Then, after 3 days of non-stop searching, luck finally showed up. I found a 1-bedroom apartment in Bucktown, not too far from work, with a small balcony overlooking a park. And best of all, the rent was only $2,200 a month. The unit was on the second floor of a 3-story building, had plenty of natural light, and offered a comfortable amount of space for someone living alone. Not wanting to risk losing it, I contacted the landlord immediately, completed all the paperwork, paid the deposit and the first month's rent so I could move in as soon as possible. And just like that, after 3 nights of bouncing between hotel rooms, I finally had a place I could call my own. After settling into my new place, I went to visit my grandfather. It was a routine I'd kept for years, every weekend without fail. His 2-story house in Oak Park, with its small garden full of roses and ornamental trees, had always been the one place that brought me peace. On that first visit after being kicked out of my parents' house, I tried to act like nothing had happened. We sat on the back porch sipping tea and discussing work and daily life. But my grandfather's sharp eyes that had seen 75 years of life, seemed to notice something was off. Just as I was about to leave, he looked at me carefully and asked, "Stephanie, is there something you're not telling me?" His voice was full of concern and quiet affection. Caught off guard, I quickly shook my head and smiled. No, Grandpa, I'm fine. I hid everything from him because I didn't want to burden him with family drama. He was getting older, and his health mattered more than anything else. He listened to my answer and gave a slow nod. He didn't press me, didn't push for more. I thought I had successfully kept the truth from him. But what I didn't know he already knew everything. And just a few days later, on his 75th birthday, my parents and sister would be taught a lesson they'd never forget. 1 month after moving out and settling into my new life, my grandfather's 75th birthday arrived. In our previous visits, he had reminded me multiple times, almost insistently, that I had to be there on this special day. To him, it wasn't just a milestone of age, but a rare opportunity for the entire family to be together. Even though I knew showing up meant I'd have to face my father, mother, and sister, the very people who had so cruelly cast me out, I still decided to go. I didn't want to disappoint my grandfather. The love he had shown me throughout the years was worth pushing through my discomfort. I had spent a lot of time searching for the perfect gift. Ultimately, I chose a thick navy blue jacket lined with soft, warm shearling on the inside. With Chicago's brutal winter just around the corner, I wanted him to feel warmer with something meaningful and from the heart. Around 6:00 p.m., I drove to his familiar house. As I stepped through the front door, I saw that the rest of my family had already gathered in the living room. They were sitting on the sofa, but not one of them looked my way. It was like I didn't exist. No greetings, no questions about how I'd been in the month since they kicked me out. My dad was the first to break the tense silence. He looked at me coldly and asked, "What are you doing here?" I chose not to respond to that loaded question. I calmly walked past him without a word. Just then, Uncle Jordan, Victor's dad, spoke up in his usual warm and sincere tone. "It's been a while, Stephanie. How have you been?" Feeling the genuine concern in his voice, I turned to him and replied, "I'm doing well. Thanks for asking, Uncle Jordan." Sitting beside him, Victor got up and gave me a firm hug. I returned it with equal respect. In that moment, the kindness and support from Uncle Jordan's family gave me a sense of comfort I hadn't felt in weeks. Right after the greetings, Grandpa came from the kitchen and walked into the living room. His face lit up when he saw me. I quickly greeted him and handed him the gift box I had wrapped carefully. He took the box with his signature warm smile, thanked me sincerely, and invited everyone to the dining table to begin the meal. Grandpa had always been a man who valued family above all else. He loved having us together, so his birthday celebration was simple, just close family, no neighbors or friends from outside. Once everyone had settled around the large oak dining table with plates of delicious food carefully arranged in front of us, Grandpa suddenly stood up. He gently tapped his forehead like he just remembered something important, then said, "I almost forgot. I've got gifts for you all." Without another word, he walked out of the dining room and headed into his bedroom to retrieve the gifts he had prepared. My parents and Harper perked up when he mentioned gifts, chatting excitedly. Their eyes lit up with anticipation, and the energy at the end of the table shifted into a buzz of noisy enthusiasm. My dad, with a confident tone, guessed, "It's got to be those expensive bottles of Scottish whiskey he's been collecting." My mom shook her head and disagreed. "No, I think he's giving each of us a few thousand." Harper, a little more blunt and self-centered, said, "I don't care what it is as long as it's expensive. I still need money for that cafe." They continued tossing around predictions, laughing and discussing what they'd do with the gifts they hadn't seen yet. Their eagerness was so over the top, it honestly made me uncomfortable. In stark contrast, Uncle Jordan's side of the table, him, Aunt Naomi, and Victor, remained quiet. They didn't chime in about the gifts. They waited patiently and respectfully for Grandpa to return, showing no sense of entitlement or greed. About 2 minutes later, Grandpa returned to the dining room holding 3 neatly wrapped gift boxes. He set them down on the table and announced, "Today, only Dennis, Victoria, and Harper will receive gifts." The 3 of them, my dad, Mom, and Harper, shouted gleefully, like kids being promised a trip to the amusement park. They didn't stop to think about anyone else's feelings, not even for a second. They didn't care that Uncle Jordan's family wasn't receiving anything. My dad even turned to Uncle Jordan with a smug look and said, "Jordan, what's your family been doing that Dad didn't give you anything?" The sarcasm and arrogance were dripping from his voice. After that smug remark, they eagerly picked up their boxes, smiling at each other with joy and pride. Their faces were glowing with satisfaction, utterly unaware that those very boxes they were clinging to would turn into brutal slaps of reality in just a few minutes. As they were still beaming over the unopened gifts in their hands, Grandpa looked at them with a mysterious smile and said, "Go ahead, open them. There's a surprise waiting." Without hesitation, the three tore into the wrapping paper like kids on Christmas morning. The sound of ripping paper filled the dining room, but within less than a minute, their excitement vanished. Their expressions shifted from eager anticipation to confusion, then to pure rage. Inside each box was no actual gift, just a single handwritten note from Grandpa. My father stood up so abruptly that his chair nearly tipped over, his face flushed red with fury. He shouted at Grandpa, "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" Harper and my mother sat frozen, silent but visibly seething. Their hands clenched the notes tightly, twitching with emotion. Grandpa, on the other hand, responded with an almost unnerving calmness. "I just gave you the same gift you gave Stephanie." At that, I leaned forward to glimpse the papers they were holding. And the moment I saw the familiar words, my heart nearly stopped. Each of the three notes said the same thing. "Leave. We are no longer family." My father, unwilling to back down, quickly tried to justify himself. He snapped, "I kicked Stephanie out because she refused to help the family. You always said family should support each other. I was following what you taught me." Grandpa nodded slowly and said, "That's true, and I'm doing the same now. But do you remember what happened 25 years ago?" The entire room fell into an eerie silence. My father squinted, trying to search his memory for something from the distant past. After nearly a minute, still confused, he asked, "What happened?" This time, Uncle Jordan stood up. He looked my father dead in the eye and said slowly and clearly, 25 years ago, when I needed $3,000 to cover Naomi's hospital delivery for Victor, you had nearly $50,000 in savings, but you refused to lend me a dime. Remember that?" My father was visibly shaken. His face went pale. He stammered, I was saving to repurchase a house." Then Grandpa locked eyes with him and said, "I didn't blame you. I didn't hold it against you. So why did you do that to Stephanie?" At that point, my dad had no argument left. He stood there like a man caught red-handed. Grandpa stared at him for a few long seconds, then asked the defining question. "Dennis, what's more important? Jordan needing money to bring Victor into the world, or Harper needing money to open a coffee shop?" Once again, my father had no answer. Silence. Nearly a minute passed before Grandpa slammed his hand on the table, so hard that the plates and glasses rattled. He shouted, "Dennis, answer me!" Everyone at the table flinched. None of us had ever seen Grandpa this angry before. My father, shaken and stumbling over his words, finally mumbled, "Victor." Victor was more important. Grandpa barked back, "Louder! I'm old. My hearing's not what it used to be." Now trembling, my father raised his voice. "Victor was more important, sir." Grandpa gave a slow, satisfied nod, like he'd been waiting years to hear those words. Then, without hesitation, he looked at the three of them and declared, "Leave. We are no longer family." My mother and Harper were now ghostly pale. My mother's voice shook as she pleaded, "Please, Dad, don't do this to us." But Grandpa cut her off. He turned to look at her and asked, "When Stephanie begged for a chance, did you give her one?" Once again, silence. No one had an answer. And then Grandpa made the most shocking announcement of the night. He spoke clearly so everyone could hear. "As of today, the will is being changed. Dennis, Victoria, and Harper are being removed. Stephanie will inherit everything." We all froze. I couldn't believe what I had just heard. Once again, my father erupted, this time in desperation. "You can't do this, Dad!" Grandpa calmly turned to Uncle Jordan and said, "Jordan, call the police." Uncle Jordan nodded, understanding precisely what Grandpa meant, and pulled out his phone to dial 911. Seeing how serious things had gotten, my mother and Harper rushed to pull my father up from his seat. The three of them hurried toward the door. But before leaving, my father turned back one last time and screamed, "You'll regret this one day." Grandpa didn't flinch. He stayed seated, watching them go, with eyes that held not even a shred of regret. When the sound of their car faded into the distance, the room fell into total silence. I sat there still trying to process everything that had just happened in the last 30 minutes. An evening that had completely changed the course of our family's future. After they left, still angry and humiliated, it took a good 5 minutes before the tension in the dining room finally faded. Only then did Grandpa's birthday dinner return to the warm, joyful atmosphere it was meant to have. Looking over at Grandpa, now calmly seated with a peaceful expression, I felt the need to express my gratitude. I looked at him and said, "Thank you for standing up for me like that. But when did you find out about everything?" He was no longer upset or tense. He replied with a gentle smile. "Ever since the day you got kicked out, Victor told me the whole story." Hearing that, I immediately turned to Victor with a look full of gratitude. "Thank you for doing that," I said sincerely. Victor nodded with a warm smile. He didn't say anything, but the look in his eyes spoke volumes, the kind of quiet, unshakable bond only real family shares. Uncle Jordan's family and I sang Happy Birthday for Grandpa to lighten the mood. Even though my parents and Harper weren't there, somehow the room felt even more cozy and joyful without them. We talked, we laughed, and we enjoyed the delicious food Grandpa had prepared. There were no more tense silences, cruel remarks, or hateful stares. After the party, I returned to my rented apartment, my heart full of gratitude toward my grandfather. He had defended me, and he had taught the people who oppressed me a lesson they would never forget. Sitting alone in my small apartment, I made a quiet promise to myself. I will take good care of Grandpa for all the years he has left. After that dramatic birthday dinner, it was as if my parents and Harper had vanished from our lives. They stopped showing up at any family gatherings. No calls, texts, or attempts to reach out to any of us. Meanwhile, I continued spending time with Grandpa, Uncle Jordan's family, and Victor. We kept our tradition of visiting him every weekend, sharing warm evenings, cooking meals, talking, laughing, and simply enjoying the comfort of that familiar home. I truly believe my life had finally reached peace and stability after cutting ties with my parents, but fate had other plans. In December 2024, during a routine checkup, Grandpa was diagnosed with late-stage lung cancer. The doctor said he had at most 8 months left, and possibly less if his health declined quickly. When we heard the news, all of us were devastated. But Grandpa was the calmest of us all. He consoled us with gentle, positive words and reminded us that 8 months was still enough time to make memories, share love, and say everything we needed. From that moment on, we made it our mission to spend more time with him. We started taking turns staying overnight at his place to help care for him. We became even more present, more intentional, knowing the clock was ticking. But what hurt me most, what filled me with both sadness and fury, was my father's cold, heartless reaction to the news. A month after learning about Grandpa's illness, I decided to drive back to the house where I grew up. I wanted to tell my parents face-to-face about Grandpa's condition, hoping, just hoping, that they might still have enough decency left to visit him before it was too late. After a few rings, my dad came to the door. When he saw me standing on the porch, he immediately tried to shut the door in my face, but I quickly spoke up. "Just listen to me for a second. Grandpa has lung cancer. He only has a few months left." He paused. Then, instead of showing any concern or sadness, he scoffed cruelly and said something that made my blood boil. "Serves him right." When I shared what happened with Uncle Jordan's family, he was so furious he nearly stormed over to confront my father and teach him a lesson. Thankfully, Victor, Aunt Naomi, and I calmed him down before things went too far. Ultimately, we agreed not to tell Grandpa about my father's reaction. Even in his final months, Grandpa occasionally mentioned my dad's name with a quiet look of longing in his eyes, a trace of regret he never spoke aloud. And then the saddest day of my life came, the day I always knew would arrive, yet could never truly be ready for. That day, after a long, exhausting shift at work, I drove straight to the hospital. It was my turn to stay overnight with Grandpa, part of the schedule we had carefully created with Uncle Jordan's family to ensure he was never alone, not for a single night. Grandpa had been hospitalized for a week due to his rapidly deteriorating health. His body had grown frail, his skin had turned gray, and even breathing had become a visible struggle. The doctors had already warned us that his time was running out. That night, just before 10 p.m., Grandpa gently nudged my hand with what little strength he had left. His eyes looked at me and said, "Stephanie, call Jordan and his family now." I knew right away what this meant. These could be his final hours. My voice trembled as I called Uncle Jordan and explained what was happening. Within 30 minutes, Uncle Jordan, Aunt Naomi, and Victor arrived at the hospital, their faces filled with worry and quiet acceptance of what was coming. In a weak but still clear voice, Grandpa began speaking to each of us one by one, as if preparing to say goodbye. To Uncle Jordan, he said, "Jordan, you have to learn to control your temper. Don't let your emotions make your decisions for you." Then he turned to Aunt Naomi. "Naomi, take better care of your health. Don't forget yourself while caring for everyone else." To Victor, he offered a faint but loving smile and said, "Victor, you're a grown man now. It's time to start thinking about settling down, starting your own family." Finally, he turned to me. His eyes were filled with love and pride as he said, "You are the granddaughter I'm most proud of. If you can forgive your parents, don't carry hatred with you for the rest of your life. But remember, forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. Forgive, but set boundaries. Protect yourself." Hearing those final words, I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. They streamed down my face as I gripped his hand, trying to absorb every ounce of warmth from the man who had loved me unconditionally. Before closing his eyes for the final time, Grandpa whispered to me, "Stephanie, tell Dennis, Victoria, and Harper I've forgiven them, and tell them I miss them." Right after that, the heart monitor let out a long, steady tone, flat, dry, final. Grandpa passed away in my arms, in peace, surrounded by the people who truly loved him. Doctors and nurses rushed into the room, doing everything they could in a final effort to bring him back. But nothing could bring him back to us, no matter how hard they tried. Out in the cold hospital hallway, Aunt Naomi clung to Uncle Jordan, sobbing like a child. Victor and I stood apart, each lost in our corner of the corridor, letting our tears fall in silence. We all felt the same deep sorrow and loss. We knew without question that from that moment on, we would never again hold Grandpa's warm hand, hear his gentle laugh, or wrap our arms around him even once more. 3 days after Grandpa passed, the funeral was held at a church. The turnout was overwhelming. Friends, neighbors, former colleagues, and countless others who had known Grandpa came to say their final goodbyes. People shared memories and offered condolences, speaking of a kind man who had always been willing to help others, no matter what. Even though Uncle Jordan had personally called to inform my parents and Harper about the time and location of the service, they never showed up. Their absence on such an important day brought us a wave of sadness and deep disappointment. Determined to give them one last chance, Uncle Jordan and Victor even drove to their house that morning, hoping that despite all the past conflict, the death of the man who raised us would bring some sense of humanity back into them. But my father slammed the door in their faces, refusing to let them finish a sentence. At that point, it became painfully clear. Bitterness and pride had completely smothered any other feeling in his heart. My father had allowed ego and resentment to triumph over family, over love, even over death. Standing at Grandpa's grave that day, watching the casket slowly lower into the ground, I felt a sorrow far more profound than grief. It wasn't just about losing the man I loved most. It was the realization that my family had shattered beyond repair. There would be no mending, no coming back. After we laid Grandpa to rest, even though the grief still weighed heavily on our hearts, we knew we had to try to return to our daily lives. Still, to keep his memory alive, we regularly gathered at his familiar home every weekend. We'd cook the meals he used to love, sit around the old dining table, and place his framed photo in the seat of honor. On those warm evenings, we'd share stories and memories about him. From when he taught Victor how to fish, to the quiet afternoons when he'd sit with me on the back porch, sipping tea while I vented about work. Though he was no longer with us physically, his love, wisdom, and the life lessons he left behind remained intensely alive in our hearts. He had become a spiritual lighthouse, still guiding us even in his absence. And then just 1 week ago, an unexpected phone call from Attorney Grayson revealed the full extent of Grandpa's sacrifice and his immense love for this family. It turned out Grandpa had prepared a will long before his passing, and according to legal protocol, the contents could only be formally disclosed exactly 30 days after his death. That call marked the beginning of a new chapter in our family's story. A final chapter Grandpa had carefully written to leave us with lasting lessons about love, forgiveness, and justice. 2 days ago, at precisely 9:00 a.m., we arrived at Attorney Grayson's office in downtown Chicago to hear the reading of Grandpa's will. As we walked into the office, Uncle Jordan and I were surprised to see my parents and Harper already there. The moment he saw them, Uncle Jordan couldn't hold back his emotions. With apparent disdain, he said, "Didn't show up when your father died, but now that it's about inheritance, you come running. You're disgusting." My father, completely unfazed and without shame, shot back shamelessly. Who in this world doesn't want money? I have every right to my share of the inheritance. That shameless response pushed Uncle Jordan past his limit. He looked ready to lunge at my father right there in the lawyer's office. Thankfully, Victor and I stepped in just in time to hold him back and keep things from escalating into a full-on brawl. Once everyone was seated and the tension had settled slightly, Attorney Grayson opened a thick file and began reading the will in a calm, professional voice. In the will, Grandpa outlined the division of his estate as follows. The two-story Oak Park house, valued at nearly $1 million, would go entirely to Uncle Jordan. The remaining $1 million in liquid assets would be divided this way. I would receive $500,000. My father and mother would each get $150,000, and Harper would receive $200,000. When the lawyer finished reading the allocations, my father smirked and said with satisfaction, "I thought he'd cut us out completely. Turns out we're still walking away with $500,000. That greedy, disrespectful comment pushed Uncle Jordan over the edge. He lunged forward and punched my father square in the face, knocking him to the ground. Before anyone could react, he climbed on top of him and delivered several more blows. Attorney Grayson witnessed the entire scene, but strangely, he didn't step in to stop it. His expression suggested that on some level, he understood why it was happening. Once again, Victor, Aunt Naomi, and I rushed to pull Uncle Jordan off. My father staggered to his feet, his face bruised and his nose bleeding. Seething, he yelled, "I'll sue you for assault." But Uncle Jordan remained calm. He stood upright, pulled out his phone, and played a video he had quietly recorded at the hospital during Grandpa's final moments. He turned the volume up. In the video, Grandpa's weak but clear voice could be heard. "Stephanie, tell Dennis, Victoria, and Harper that I forgive them, and tell them I miss them." Then came the final moment. Grandpa's eyes slowly closed as he slipped away peacefully. Uncle Jordan had recorded that moment to preserve Grandpa's final words, never knowing how powerful they would become. After watching the video, my parents and Harper looked like ghosts. Their faces went pale. Their eyes were empty, full of shame and regret. But it wasn't over yet. Attorney Grayson then pulled out 3 sealed envelopes. He explained that these were personal letters Grandpa had written individually to my father, my mother, and Harper after being diagnosed with lung cancer. I don't know what those letters said, but I do know that all 3 were utterly shattered after reading them. My father broke down in tears, screaming through sobs, "Dad, I was wrong. I'm so sorry." My mother collapsed into a chair, hugging Harper tightly. The 2 of them cried uncontrollably. I still don't know the exact words Grandpa wrote in those letters, but one thing I'm sure of, in the years to come, they will live with a pain far worse than anything money could ever fix. The pain of knowing they abandoned the man who once loved them the most. About 10 minutes later, feeling nothing more to say, I quietly left the office with Uncle Jordan, Aunt Naomi, and Victor, leaving the others behind with Attorney Grayson and their tears of too late regret. It's been 2 days since that emotional reading of the will at Attorney Grayson's office. Today I decided to visit Grandpa's grave at Graceland Cemetery. I wanted to tell him everything that had happened and to thank him for all he had done for us. As I walked into the cemetery with a bouquet, I was surprised to see 3 familiar figures standing by his headstone. It was my parents and Harper. They stood there in silence, seemingly talking to Grandpa in their own quiet way. When they noticed me approaching, they looked startled. None of them made eye contact. It was as if they were ashamed of everything that had happened. As they walked past me, my father suddenly paused. Without looking directly at me, he said softly, his voice trembling, "Stop by for dinner sometime. We miss you." Then, just as quickly, he turned and hurried after my mother and Harper, almost like he was afraid that if he lingered, his emotions might betray him. I stood there and watched them walk away until they disappeared from view, a swirl of emotions rising inside me. Maybe, just maybe, Grandpa's final letters had truly reached their hearts. I laid the bouquet gently in front of his headstone, then sat down beside it. I began telling him everything, what happened at the will reading, how my parents reacted to the inheritance, the punch Uncle Jordan threw, the final video of his words, and especially the letters he had left behind. When I finished, I sat there quietly for a few moments. Then I said softly, "Thank you for everything, Grandpa. You taught me how to stand up for myself, but also how to forgive. I'll carry your words with me always." Just as those words left my lips, a gentle breeze passed through the cemetery, carrying with it the faint, sweet scent of nearby flowers. It felt like a warm touch, like he was still with me somehow, letting me know he heard every word. My story ends here. I didn't share it to criticize or badmouth my family. Through this story, especially the moment at the lawyer's office, watching my parents and Harper shift from greed to complete emotional collapse after reading Grandpa's final letters, I want to offer you just one piece of advice. And don't live with regret. If you can let something go, let it go. Cherish the people who love you while they're still here, and especially cherish every moment you get when you know their time is limited, because once they're gone, there are no second chances to make things right. And before I end, I want to leave you with a question. If one day your family told you, "We are no longer family," what would you do? Would you walk away quietly the way I did, or would you stay and fight, even if it meant more conflict? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I genuinely want to hear your take on this. Don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and share the story if it resonated with you. Thank you for sticking with me and for listening all the way to the end.